And we're on. Morning, everyone. I call to order this meeting of the Finance Committee for Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025. And before I get to the land acknowledgement, I just want to make sure that Councillor Ma, are you able to hear me all right? Okay, excellent. Very good. Okay, so it's always important to acknowledge the land that we are on and its traditional and historic stewards of the land, especially on a day such as today, which is Earth Day. And of course, there are many things that we can learn from the traditional stewards, going from forest management to utilization of resources and minimizing waste. And so with that in mind, and in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, I acknowledge that we're gathered in the heart of Treaty 7 territory of Southern Alberta. This land is home to the Blackfoot Confederacy, consisting of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani First Nations, also the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and our most adjacent Indigenous neighbors, the Stoney Nakoda, comprised of the Bearspaw, Goodstoney, and Chiniki First Nations. Further, we are located within the Rocky View Métis District within the Battle River Territory District 4. Okay, and now looking to the agenda, any changes? No changes, so I move approval of the agenda for the April 22nd, 2025 Finance Committee meeting as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now we'll turn to item C1, minutes. Are there any errors or omissions in the February 11th, 2025 finance meeting? Seeing none, I will move that we approve the minutes of the February 11th, 2025 finance meeting as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now we will move to the business for today. D1, Town of Canmore audited consolidated financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2024. Ms. Gibbons, welcome to Finance Committee.
Good morning, members of the Finance Committee. I'm really just here to do introductions briefly. So the first agenda item this morning is the approval of the 2024 financial statements. Our financial statements have been audited by Avail Chartered Professional Accountants, our external auditors, in accordance with Canadian General Accepted Auditing Standards. And with that, I'll be handing it over to Mr. Scott and Ms. Lutz for them to walk through their report. Just you. I didn't even ask who was presenting, sorry.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I just have everything in a PowerPoint slide for you this morning. Everyone can see that on their screens, like magic? Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to be covering this morning is the independent auditor's report, the financial results. I'll highlight a couple of the key notes to the financial statements. We'll go through the indicators of financial condition, and then in camera we can go through the management letter and post-audit letter. So starting with the independent auditor's report, it starts off by stating that we gave a clean opinion that the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with the Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards. We do have an emphasis on matters paragraph this year, and that just relates to a prior period adjustment that was done to reduce CCH's inventory for condo conversion costs associated with past units that were sold. So the inventory was reduced, and then the cost of sales expense was increased, and that was a change in the comparative figures in 2023. Then the report will go on to note that management is responsible for the statements, Council will be responsible for management oversight. And then our responsibilities as the auditors is to identify and assess the risk of material misstatements. We are to understand the town's internal controls. We evaluate the accounting policies and estimates used in the financial statements. We conclude on the going concern assumption, so that's just the ability of the town to continue to operate for the foreseeable future and no issues with that. And then we evaluate the overall presentation of the financial statements in accordance with those accounting standards. But at the end of the day, that clean audit opinion was issued, and that's what you want attached to your financial statements. Then moving into financial results, I'm going to be starting with the statement of operations. So here you'll see revenue overall going to be up by $14 million from prior year. The highlights are taxes are up by $3.2 million as per the budget. User fees and sales of goods will be up by $3 million, and that will be due to a few factors. So there was an increase in utility rates, increase in usage, and also an increase in the number of utility accounts billed. Also, paid parking saw an increase in rates and usage as well. And actuals came in a bit higher than budgeted amount just due to more usage at the end of the day on that item. Then investment income is going to be up by $1.7 million with more invested in 2024 and also earning a good return on those principal protected notes. Then budgeted conservatively on that line item as this item will fluctuate with the market fluctuations. Then development levies saw an increase of $5 million over the prior year, and that's just due to the several large development projects taking place within the town. Also budgeted on a conservative basis as that line item will often fluctuate. And then license and permits will be up $1.2 million with the increase in building permits with the developments. And then franchise and concession contracts are up by $1 million over prior year, and that's purely due to the increase in rates for ATCO and Fortis. Increase was anticipated and budgeted for. So overall revenues land at $88.6 million. Then on the expense side, expenses will be up by $6.5 million. Salaries, wages, and benefits up by 2.7, and that will be due to a 5.5% cost of living increase. There was a $400,000 retro pay to firefighters and also 6 new positions created within the town. Contracted services up $1.9 million, and of that increase, 1.4 of it relates to the contaminated sites liability being accrued for that leased parcel of land owned by the province. And then the remaining increases due to the transit's costs were up with the increase in frequency on the routes. Then materials, goods, and supplies, very comparable to prior year, but going to be up from budget on that line item, as that is where CCH's cost of sales for the condo units get recorded. And then interest on long-term debt, comparable to prior year, under budget on that one by $1.4 million due to budgeting for a full year of interest for the fire hall and the water treatment plant, but the debt was acquired later than anticipated in 2024. And then other expenses are going to be up by $600,000 due to repair work on a railway crossing, and then up from budget with non-tangible capital expenditures coded here that did not meet the capitalization criteria, but expenditures are budgeted for under capital. And then amortization also saw a bump up this year of $700,000 with the new fire hall and the Cougar Creek flow retention structure. So overall expenses land at $77.2 million. So to summarize, revenues were up by $14 million, expenses up by $6.5 million, and that gives you an excess before capital being up by $7.5 million, landing at that 11.3. Then capital revenues will be down by $13 million overall. That will be due to government transfers for capital. We're down by $8 million, and that's due to the Cougar Creek flow retention structure nearing completion in 2024, where in 2023 it was a full year of construction. And then also contributed assets are going to be down from prior year, and that relates to land being contributed to the town, both in the current year and in the prior year. Just in 2024, there was a couple less parcels that were contributed, and also the fair market value of the land per parcel was lower this year in comparison to past year. So overall, the current year surplus lands at $30.5 million. That figure will include the capital revenue, amortization, which is a non-cash expense, and also the contributed asset revenue, which is also non-cash, but it does not include capital expenses, the debt repayments, or the transfers to and from reserves. And then management will present the bridge that accounts for all of these adjustments. Actual operating surplus for the town alone comes in at $1.8 million. Any questions with the auditor's report or the statement of operations? Okay. So next will be the statement of cash flow. So on, oh, yeah.
Can you go back to the statement? You said that a piece of land was worth less this year than it was last year?
Yeah,
It was a
so.
quick statement, and I was like, huh, what?
Yeah, so 10 parcels were contributed to the town this year. In the prior year, there was 12 parcels. So the fair market value of the parcel of land that was received this year was about $122,000 per parcel, where the land that was contributed in 2023 was $675,000 per parcel. So it's just purely due to the market value of the type of land that's being contributed to the town.
I'm confused, but so much so that I must be missing something. So it went down, a parcel of land went down to $500,000? No.
Different parcels, yeah. It would be two, I believe it's different land that was contributed, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So the land, I guess, in 2023 was worth more than the land that was contributed in 2024.
No, that's okay. We don't have a list with us. We can go back, but basically, I believe what they're saying is there were 12 parcels contributed at a higher value per parcel last year. Just depends on where that development's happening and what those parcels are. We're talking about 10 different parcels of land this year at different values. That helps.
So we're not talking about a reduction in value of certain properties, we're talking about different properties coming in at a different value.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Value.
Yeah. Yes,
You're right there.
yes, yeah. Yeah, any other questions? Okay. So then, for the statement of cash flows, here you'll see operations provided positive cash flow of $32.6 million under that first subtotal. Then the town spent $44 million on capital, with $41 million related to the purchase of tangible capital assets, and then $3.6 million relates to the investment in future housing development for the CCH's Stewart Creek Rise development. Then under investing, the town moved $8 million to investments. And then financing will show an inflow of $18.2 million, with $21 million of new debentures offset by $2.6 million of regular repayments. So overall, that leaves the town with a cash deficit for the year of $2.3 million, bringing cash and temporary investments at the end of the year to $47.6, which overall in a cash position, still comparable to prior year there. Then for the statement of financial position, this will give you a snapshot as to where the town ended up as of December 31st, 2024. So very much we're looking at a point in time here. For financial assets, they will be up by $15 million. Cash is down per the statement of cash flows. Trade and other receivables are up by $5.2 million, and the majority of that increase relates to the off-site levies receivable for a couple of the large developments. Investment in future housing developments, again, relates to the CCH's Stewart Creek Rise development, and then investments up as per the statement of cash flow as well. Then on the liability side, they also saw an increase of $15 million over prior year. So that will be due to deposits will be up by 2.4 with the increase in the development deposits. Deferred revenue will be down by $7 million with spending of the externally restricted grant sources. And I will be showing the breakdown of that deferred revenue note on the next slide. And then long-term debt is going to be up by $18 million due to the new debt for the water treatment plant, the Bow Valley Water and Wastewater Project, and also the final loan disbursement relating to the new fire hall. And then the contaminated sites liability of $1.4 million, new this year, just relating to that lease parcel of land that has contamination and the province requiring remediation. The remediation plan has been submitted to the province and is currently pending approval. So that 1.4 will represent the minimum estimated cost to remediate that at this point in time. So then overall net assets come in at 23.4 million. And then that net financial asset indicator will represent what's available to the town for future use. And overall, very comparable to prior year, only about a $50,000% increase in that position. And then here's the town's note disclosure for deferred revenue. So as mentioned, $7 million decrease from prior year, and most of that is going to be due to the Cougar Creek grant and spending of that going from the 10.3 down to the 1.2. Then on the non-financial asset side, overall non-financial assets will be up by 30 million. So inventory for consumption, which mainly relates to CCH, is going to be down by $1.4 million due to 6 condo units being sold during the year. And then what's left is 2 more units to go on that end. And then tangible capital assets will be up by $32 million, with $41 million in capital purchases offset by $12 million in amortization. So the largest projects this year related to the Cougar Creek flow retention structure, the water treatment plant number 2, the Bow Valley Water and Wastewater Upgrade Phase 2, and also the Bow Valley Trail and TP Town Street Drainage Improvement Project as well. Then overall accumulated surplus comes in at $486 million, with a $30 million increase from prior year relating to the current year surplus that we saw in the statement of operations. And then that's broken down within the second table on the screen, with the $30 million being allocated with a $600,000 decrease to unrestricted, $18 million increase to reserves, and then a $13 million increase to equity intangible capital assets. So overall statement of financial position, healthy with being in that net asset position, and then overall the accumulated operating surplus position also increasing from prior year. And then for the reserve note disclosure, here for informational purposes to show the breakdown in what has been internally restricted by the town. Operating reserves remain comparable at the $6.9 million. And then the increase in reserves will be to the capital reserves amongst the various categories. And the reserves are fully funded, cash covered, which is another healthy financial indicator of the town. And then for the next note will be the town's debt limits and debt servicing limits as defined by the MGA. The calculation is based on the town's operating revenue and only includes the town numbers. All of the controlled related entities are not included within this calculation, as it may be misleading if it didn't overflate those debt limits. So that has been approved years ago to exclude those related entities. And then also we always like to emphasize when performing these calculations internally to always normalize the operating revenue for one-off items. But even with the new debt this year, plenty of room to absorb it within these debt and servicing limits. And then the last note disclosure I will highlight is just the prior period adjustment. It just provides some further details as to the inventory adjustment related to CCH. So just here for informational purposes as well. So I'll pause there. The next section will just relate to the indicators of financial condition. Any questions on the financial statements?
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just back one more statement. The debt from external organizations, not included in our debt limits. So that there has been some discussion in the past whether or not CCH debt would apply to us or not, so it does not.
It does not. Yeah, their revenues isn't factor within the total debt limit and servicing limit on the screen.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
Any other questions? I don't see any.
Okay. So this gets to be more of the fun part, the indicators of financial condition. So what we're doing is we're comparing the town of Canmore, which will be the blue line in these graphs, to the 102 towns within Alberta, which will be represented by the red line. Then we're also comparing Canmore to the 4 comparable towns within Alberta with similar populations, which will be the green line. And then the purple line will represent 13 any municipal type with similar populations within Alberta. So whether the municipality is a town, a village, a city, a county, as long as it has a similar population to Canmore, it will be included in the purple. So for the first indicator, we're looking at assets to liabilities. So this ratio will illustrate the extent a government leverages its asset base. So this one will include tangible capital assets. Higher is generally better on this one. Decrease from prior year down to the 5.74 just relates to the town taking on new debt this year. The ratio slightly below also the comparable municipalities, but overall no concerns. The town still has 5.74 greater assets in comparison to its liability, so very much still a healthy ratio. The only time you would get concerned if that was to drop closer to 1 and then below 1 is a no-no. So, and that would take a lot of liabilities to even get anywhere near that. So overall, healthy ratio for the town. Then the financial assets to liabilities focuses on assets that are normally converted to cash. So no tangible capital assets is included in this calculation. Higher is better. Above 1 will mean a net financial asset position. Below 1 will mean net financial debt. Also, if it's above 1, it will indicate that net financial assets and resources are on hand for the town to finance future operations. With this one, slight decrease from prior year, also due to the liabilities being up with debt. However, town is above the comparable municipalities with similar populations and also close to the other comparable municipalities within Alberta. For the current ratio, this will illustrate the town's ability to meet its short-term obligations. So higher is better on this one as well. You don't want below 1, as that would mean the municipality wouldn't be able to meet its short-term obligation. For the current ratio for the town continues to be strong at 3, and then higher than all of those comparable municipalities with similar populations. For the operating expenses to taxable assessments, this will illustrate the town spending over time in relation to the growth in the economy. So on this one, lower is better. 2024 ratio is down with the increase in the taxable assessments, and then the higher property values in Canmore does keep this ratio on the low end in comparison to the other comparables. Public debt charges to revenue will measure the town's debt repayments that need to be made within the next fiscal year as a percentage of revenue. So also lower is better, slight increase with more debt this year relating to capital. However, the indicator of 0.06 is still slightly above those comparable municipalities and also in line with past years prior to that. So still trending very well on this indicator. And then debt to revenue percentage will illustrate the growth in revenue compared to the town's change in debt. Lower is better on this ratio. Increase, again, due to the new debt this year for capital. Higher than the comparable, but that will just be due to the capital and infrastructure investment needed by the town. And that's also reflected on the next ratio here of the infrastructure investment. So this one will illustrate the total cost of tangible capital asset relative to annual amortization. The town's ratio is comparable to prior year and above the comparable municipalities, but not unusual with that Cougar Creek flow retention structure, which is a one-of-a-kind capital project that is needed for the area. And it started back in 2020, where you'll see in the 2020 column, the blue line is at a peak at the beginning of that project starting. Then own source revenue to taxable assessments will illustrate the town's own source revenue compared to its tax base. So lower is better. Ratio has decreased over prior due to the higher taxable assessments. The town is below the comparables, but again, mainly due to the higher property values in Canmore compared to other locations in Alberta. Government transfers to total revenue will illustrate the government grants, which includes capital grants received in comparison to total revenue. So this will offer a perspective on the degree of vulnerability a government faces as a result of its dependence on another level of government. So on this one, ratio, is it better to be lower or higher? It honestly depends on how you look at it. All municipalities will receive those capital allocations from the province, and it's allocated to all the municipalities within Alberta. So always important to use and get use out of those capital funds. Decrease from prior year down to the 17% is just due to less capital funded by the capital grants this year. The town ratio is also only slightly higher than the comparable municipalities. Then reserves to accumulated surplus will just show the amount of internally restricted for future purposes. The town has a healthy reserve balance with the increase in reserves from prior year. Town is also trending above all of the comparable municipalities. And then the last indicator will be the accumulated surplus available for future use. So that will also be the unrestricted and restricted together. For the town, accumulated surplus has been steadily increasing over the last 5 years. Overall healthy and above all of the comparables as well on this one. So with that, overall, the town is trending well with all similar municipalities within Alberta. There was no red flags, no concerns. The town is financially healthy. Any questions on the indicators?
Councillor Graham.
Thank you. I guess I'm less concerned about the short term. I'm more concerned about some long-term things. And a $100 million wastewater treatment plant that's coming down the pipe and how we're positioned for that. And does this report address that concern at all, or not that I'm seeing?
Yeah, so this report, very much for taking the numbers at a point in time. It does show the reserves are healthy. There was nothing, if debt has to be taken on with that project, there wasn't anything where the current debt load is too high in comparison to other municipalities. What you have in reserves and what's available for future use, that's honestly going to be dependent on how much those projects cost and the future plans of the municipality. So that's always kind of a hard question to answer. But overall, based on the numbers, the town is positioned financially well.
And there's a lot of factors when you look forward to
Yeah,
this
yes,
rates.
yeah,
Because, you know, obviously rates will be adjusted to determine how much reserves will be, and therefore how much debt may or may not be required.
correct, absolutely.
Any sort of grants that we get or
Right.
funding that we may or may not.
Absolutely.
I'm kind of worst case scenarioing that one a little bit.
Yeah, lots of factors there.
Okay. Any other questions? See none?
Okay, so my next section just relates to the management letter and post-audit letter that we typically do in camera.
Okay, very good. I will then move that the Finance Committee close the meeting to the public to prevent disclosure of personnel evaluations in accordance with Section 17, Sub 4 of the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Act. Okay, all those in favor? Carried unanimously. Okay, we are in a closed session. closed session. And I will now move that the Finance Committee approve the Town of Canmore's audited consolidated financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2024 as presented. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none? Actually, before I call the question, I will say thank you to all of those involved. I know that this is a big lift every year to do these, so thank you to all of the administration for all the work that you do. Thank you to the auditors for the work that you do, and it's very much appreciated getting this fulsome report. I especially appreciate the graphs to see how we are doing. It looks like we're doing fine in all fronts, and it's always nice to see how we're doing in relation to others as well. So thank you. Councillor Moy, you have a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I also wanted to say, similar to what you're saying with regards to administration, I want to say thank you to Ms. Richardson and the team. You know, Therese Rogers, she had finished up last year and handed the baton over, and here we are seamlessly continuing on with some great practices. And it's just really great to know that, you know, our team is carrying us well at Mount Financial Steadfast and reporting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else? All right, then call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item D2, which is the 2024 Administrative Financial Report. Ms. Gibbons, back to you.
Perfect. So the next agenda item this morning is our 2024 Administrative Financial Report, where I'll cover the 2024 operating results, including the bridge between our internal surplus and the audited financial statements just presented. The main contributors to that surplus, a couple other items of note. I'll touch briefly on capital and then end with the allocation of the surplus we are recommending to the Finance Committee. As we've highlighted in prior years, the audited statements we just went through are prepared in accordance with generally accepted principles for local government and are quite different in presentation than our internal statements, which are focused around determining the municipal tax requirement. Fundamentally, the same underlying information, just for very different purposes, and so presented actually quite differently. The bridge I have on the screen here forms the connector between the two, how we go from our internal operating surplus and how we report our financials to the number presented in the financial statements that were just approved in the previous motion. The starting point for the bridge is the surplus per our internal statements, and that's consistent with the summary of all units you have in attachment 2 in your package at $1,856,092. We then add back several items. So internally, we treat our transfers to reserves like an expense in that that is money that we are setting aside for future use. We also add in capital revenues, as those aren't considering operating revenues in our internal statements. And finally, we add back the debenture principal, which we treat as an expense in our internal statements, but the principal portion is not an expense per our external statements. Then we subtract several items. Like the transfers from reserves above, we transfers to reserves, we then remove transfers from reserves. We also subtract non-TCA expenditures. So when we talk about our town capital projects, we do include things like projects, plans, studies that have a multi-year benefit, but don't necessarily meet the TCA criteria for an asset. So we reduce our internal surplus by those expenditures. We also don't include amortization in our internal statement, so we subtract that. And finally, we remove any loss or gain on disposal of our TCA. We then end at the excess of revenue over expenses per our non-consolidated audited statements. And then when we add the surplus of our consolidated entities at $136,854, we end at the excess of revenue over expenses for 2024 per the consolidated statements we were just looking at $11,358,442. So again, this just shows how we reconcile the internal surplus we talk about to the financial statements that Avail just presented. I know there's a lot there. Any questions on that bridge before we move on? So again, the 2024 surplus per our internal statements totaled rounded 1.9 million. This represents approximately 2.4% of the total budgeted annual expenditures of 77 million. And historically, our surpluses have generally been in the 2 to 3% of expenditures range, so we remain kind of right in that window. The operating surplus for 2024 of, again, I'll just keep rounding, 1.9 million primarily stems from a handful of large items. These include savings in policing, savings from the timing of debt, higher supplementary property taxes, greater grants received than expected, and the results of recreation operations. These contributors are partially offset by recognizing an expense related to the requirement to reclaim the South Millennium leased lands, which came up a little bit when we were looking at the audited statements. And I'll speak to all these items a bit further in the coming slides. The remainder of the surplus comes from numerous other smaller items like savings and expenses, but these are the big ones. So I'm going to start with general municipal. So these are items that are somewhat shared by the whole organization. And so that contributes to the surplus about 1.39 million. Supplementary taxes for 2024 were higher than budgeted by 381,000, and that was due to the increase in property value from properties that were completed during the year. We had 309,000 more in grants beyond what we expected. So for the LGFF operating grant, we received 401,000 versus the 200,000 we had budgeted. Our 2024 LGFF operating allocation was matched to our 2023 MSI operating allocation. So if you recall, LGFF is the new MSI. In 2024, we also received the Low Income Transit Pass Program grant for 108,000, which had not been budgeted. And as you may recall, that actually also contributed to our surplus in the previous year. Finally, we took the 3.5 million in financing for the fire station later than planned. While there were savings in 2024 and last year too, actually, as a result of when we took that debt, really it's just a timing shift and the whole debt payment schedule is just pushed out. So those were the biggest items, again, within general municipal, and all the rest within that area added up to 300,000. So staffing costs are the biggest expenditure within our budget, and so we analyze them separately from the variances in other revenue and expense items. Overall, looking at the salaries, wages, and benefits line item for the whole town, the town spent very close to what was budgeted. Organizationally, 26.6 million was budgeted, and that included $820,000 in slippage, and 26.7 million was spent in that line item. However, there are other impacts in other line items that relate to staffing variances. So within certain departments, additional contracted services were retained because of staffing vacancies. So savings from vacant positions were offset by increased contracted services costs. Additionally, slippage in positions that are reserve funded do not contribute to the town's overall slippage target. And slippage in areas with dedicated reserves like economic development or paid parking goes to those specific reserves rather than flowing to our surplus. So once all those items have been taken into consideration, we actually fell slightly short of the budgeted slippage by $100,000. Moving on to everything else, so not general municipal and not salary, wages, and benefits, we had savings of $152,000. On the largest surpluses side, the RCMP contract costs came in considerably under budget, primarily due to lower net utilization in FTEs and later than planned delivery of equipment. Within recreation, there were increased revenues as well as savings in expenses. For streets and roads, there were savings in snow and ice control costs and fuel costs. And finally, on the surplus side, facilities where there were increased revenues related to leases combined with savings in supply and energy due to lower demand and prices. With respect to the other side, these surpluses were partially offset by one item recognized within the Public Works admin area. So in 2024, we had a significant unbudgeted expense from recording a potential contaminated site liability on a parcel of land leased from the province as is required by accounting standards. So the province directed us in 2024 to reclaim the leased land at South Millennium back to its natural state after it's been used as an unofficial dumping site for many years. So this may sound familiar. Originally, we had put this forward as a new capital project for 2025, and it was approved with a capital budget back in February. Then once we were preparing the 2024 financial statements and the accompanying work with the team from Avail, our team realized that since the obligation had actually arisen in 2024, it needed to be recognized with the 2024 results. So that included recognizing that potential liability as well as the accompanying expense. So as such, the separately created and funded capital project for 2025 will not be required. We'll come back to that later today at the special meeting. So for now, when the work occurs as was originally intended, instead of being recorded as a new capital project, it will extinguish this liability. And the expense side has now reduced our overall surplus. So again, first time for us, this is a bit of an unusual item.
So just on that, it's not saying that the work isn't being done, but it's being accounted for differently.
Yeah, we're accounting for it in 2024 instead of 2025 when the work will actually occur. The obligation arose in 2024.
Right. Councillor Graham, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. The rec fees, what percentage of gross revenue are we over and above? I'm wondering, are our fees, could we lower our fees a little bit with that $250,000 surplus there in the rec department?
Might look to
Mr. Mackay?
Just so I understand the question, you asked, should we lower our fees based on that? Council has the Recreation Services Operating Policy is how we set fees. So there's a pyramid which we use to price various programs based on community benefit. So I would say that I'd lean on that as opposed to a one-year result when it comes to establishing fees.
So this is a year of anomaly as far as the surplus there?
Hesitant to, rec services in a lot of cases, rec has come in better than budget. It doesn't run a deficit. With that said, it received significant support during the pandemic.
But the rec doesn't include all the facility costs.
Doesn't include the
Right.
facilities costs.
So it's actually not a true profit. If you were a business, you'd be taking a look at all of your costs and stuff, and in fact, it's therefore still a subsidized service.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a great point. Thank you very much.
Councillor Faubert.
I was just going to say that being successful in recreation in our world, gold star. So, yeah, I think that this is a really good sign that we are providing great programs and people are using them. Thank you.
We also did just look at the percentage, and it was only a 4% increase over budget. So on a percentage basis, it's actually
Great.
quite a small number.
Thank you. Dr. Cottle.
I'll just add one more small thing, that recreation is really, can be really varied year to year based on, a certain age of kids who need summer camp. And so that amount can really radically change over any given year. It's really, when you look at the big scheme of our budget, that is a very small surplus for how we budget.
Great, thank you. Okay.
So the largest variances total 152,000 of the remaining 466,000, and again, that remaining surplus really comes from multiple smaller items across the remaining departments. The surplus is really generated by this kind of small handful of items that we've just discussed. So if there's nothing else on what's contributed to the surplus, I was going to move on to a summary of the transfers to reserves based on council policy, which compares our planned budgeted transfer to the actual transfer from our actual operating results. So for asset rehab and replacement, the transfer to the reserve was $69,000 higher than budgeted due to increased franchise fees due to volumes, and sustainability was $6,000 higher, again, due to those increased franchise fee due to volumes. You may recall the franchise fee allocation model supports both of those reserves. The Integrated Transportation Management Reserve, also sometimes referred to as the Paid Parking Reserve, is $12,000 higher than planned due to slightly higher paid parking revenues and some savings we had in expenses. No transfers were planned for the Development Application Reserve, but $842,000 was transferred due to fee-supported surpluses due to the volume and timing of development activity in 2024. $21,000 more was transferred to the Photo Radar Reserve due to higher than expected net photo radar revenues. The transfer to Economic Development Reserve was $60,000 higher because of business registry revenues and some savings in expenses. The transfer to the offsite levy, based on the volume of development again, was 5.3 million, higher than our original more conservative estimates. No transfer was planned for the cash in lieu of parking reserve. However, there was 31,500 in transfers, again, based on development activity. The transfer for water wastewater utilities was 3.2 million higher, primarily due to development revenues flowing into that rate-supported model. On the flip side, the transfer to the solid waste collection and recycling reserves was 65,000 lower than anticipated, primarily due to an additional position that was added. And across all reserves, $1 million was planned conservatively in interest revenues. There can be a lot of variability there, but due to strong investment performance and rising interest rates, the transfer was actually 3.5 million higher across all of the reserves. So between the surplus discussion we just finished and these reserve transfer variances, that's the level of detail I was going to walk through for our internal financial results for today's presentation. Further details by roll-up with all the additional comments are included in the package in that second attachment. So if there are any questions on anything I haven't covered or any questions on anything I did, happy to walk through anything else and address any questions there might be.
Councillor Faubert.
I have a question about the photo radar reserve. What's the future of that? If we don't have photo radar anymore, will it just go down to zero with the programs that exist and then?
Yeah, so I believe the conversation at budget time was basically this is the last intended year of the program. We're basically drawing down the balance that's there for the approved utilizations this year, and then at a future point, if the program no longer exists, we could remove it from the reserve schedule.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, no other questions.
So seeing no other questions on operating, included in attachment 3 are all the projects that were budgeted for 2024. So that includes previous year projects that were still in progress and were carried into 2024. That report includes the spending, the budget, where the funding came from, as well as the current project status, or I should say current as of the end of the year. Also included are schedules of reserves and deferred revenue, which show transfers in and out, including the usage of those funds and the ending balances. So I just went through some of the changes in the transfers, but there's a more fulsome reconciliation in your package as well. So just wanted to check, again, I'm not really going to walk through any of that, but just see if there were any questions on any of those attachments before I move on to the allocation of the surplus. So seeing none, this is the recommended allocation of the surplus. So we're recommending that $900,000 go to the tax stabilization reserve. Again, as a reminder, the purpose of this reserve is to smooth the impact of tax rate increases in cases of an emergent and/or non-recurring nature. Over the last few years and continuing into the next few years, significant draws have been planned from this reserve to mitigate tax rate increases. So a draw of $600,000 from this reserve was made in 2024 as per the approved budget to mitigate the higher costs of RCMP and fire. As the town has now ended in an overall surplus position, we're recommending that an amount be returned to the reserve so that it continues to be available for future years. Increasing this reserve is also considered prudent given the recent economic uncertainty and potential future impacts to our operating costs given tariffs and broader macroeconomic forces. We're living in interesting times. So this contribution will also help to increase the balance of our tax stabilization reserve and move it closer to the targeted balance as specified in our reserves policy by 2026. On the other side, as highlighted in the preparation of the 25-26 capital budgets, there does remain significant pressure on our general capital and asset replacement rehabilitation reserves, especially when compared to all the identified work to be accomplished in the coming years, particularly, again, once we look at all those unfunded projects in the capital plan. So given those significant needs as well, we kind of went a 50-50 split, if you will, between the tax stabilization reserve to provide some contingency planning on the operating side and supporting the general capital reserve, knowing that we have significant needs on the capital side as well. So in conclusion, the recommendation for this report is that the Finance Committee approve allocating the 2024 operating surplus of $1,856,092 and to the following reserves: $900,000 to the tax stabilization reserve, and the remainder $956,092 to the general municipal capital reserve.
Right. Thank you very much, Ms. Gibbons. Councillor Graham, you have a question.
Yeah. Thank you, Your Worship. Ms. Gibbons, I wonder if you could, I'm looking at other municipalities. Calgary had a $275 million surplus, and they moved all of that to their tax stabilization reserve. And as do, this is obviously our discretion and administration's recommendation that we're splitting this one. I wonder if you can speak a little bit to, what if we move this entire thing to tax stabilization? What would that look like for us? What are the pros and cons of that at this point in time?
So the recommended transfer we have moves us, again, within the next couple of years to what our recommended target would be. So by moving all of this, we would well exceed the target balance per our reserves policy, is my recollection. And also, that would more heavily favor the operating side while leaving us less room on the capital side, where we also know there are significant needs. Looking ahead to the capital projects we know about and currently have funded, the tariffs will potentially have significant impact on our planned capital projects. I know some of these things look like, especially if I take off my manager of finance hat and as a resident, these are large dollar values we're talking about. But then you look at the individual impact of a project like the Cougar Creek retention structure and what that budget, where we ended up at versus where we started, looking ahead to the treatment plants and, potential RCMP detachment, all of the things that we know are coming our way, to me, in this uncertain landscape also means that there are significant needs on the capital side. It was, Mr. Irwin and I were just talking about it, it felt like a big deal to us when our amortization exceeded $10 million annually. So it should be a rough proxy of, all of the assets owned by the town over their useful lives is about $10 million a year to replace. We're now at 12 for the town. And so, in theory, we should be contributing $12 million to replace even just our existing assets every year. So to me, there are needs on the operating side. That is why we recommended some. But to me, where our recommendation stemmed from is we really have strong needs on both sides. Once we have our new long-term financial strategy, we'll maybe be a little bit better to articulate where we are now with respect to funding our future capital needs. I appreciate where you were going with some of the questions to Avail earlier about looking forward and not just past, which our audited statements do. So we are looking to have another update to that in the future that will further inform that. But based on what we know now, we know those needs are there. So that would be the driver behind our recommendation today.
If we were to move it all into tax stabilization, we could move it out of tax stabilization into other reserves, should we desire at that point in time. I guess, I am concerned about the next 4 years and what's going on down south and how those op costs could be challenging, I think. So I'm appreciating both stances, I think, here. And it is kind of.
So do you have a question?
I don't know that I do it right now.
Right.
Yeah, thanks.
Because the opposite is also equally true. You can move it from other places. Yeah. And we do have reserves levels that we're going for that we are, trying to catch up. So, yeah. Thanks. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Councillor Ma, I forgot to look up at the screen.
No problem. Thank you, Your Worship. Ms. Gibbons, first off, apologies for calling Ms. Richardson prior. What is the target number that would get us to our tax stabilization reserve? I know 900,000 is getting us well on the way. What is that number that you referred to that would be the target?
I think 4.5 million, we were really close.
That's my recollection, it was 4.5 million.
Okay. And so with the 900, where does that bring us to? About 4 point.
With the 900, what did that bring us to?
A little bit over for 25 and under
Yeah, it was between the 2 years we just approved, we were slightly over for 25, slightly under for 2026. That 900,000 really, from my perspective, kind of brought us into the sweet spot over those 2 years.
Okay, and then that number is, what would the number of that reserve be to be in sweet spot?
4.9 altogether. If we add this in.
Oh, so we add this 900,000, it brings us to 4.9.
Yeah,
Okay, all right, thank you.
which is more than we need for 2025, but it will dip down in 2026.
Yeah.
So it keeps us in a good spot.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I will move that the Finance Committee approve allocating the 2024 operating surplus of $1,856,092 into the following reserves. $900,000 to the Tax Stabilization Reserve and $956,092 to the General Municipal Capital Reserve. Would anybody like to speak to that motion? Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Administration. I'm happy to support this motion. I am always very impressed by our diligence and the hard work that we do at our finances as a municipal government. It's not the same as other levels of government. It's not the same as business. It's really not the same as anything else, really. And I think that some of the indicators to me that give me a feeling of gratitude and pride of our financial health include our reserves and the fact that we have reserve policies that set targets, and we are planning into the future for all of the things that we know we need as a community. We talk about that wastewater treatment plant, and it's really important that we do, because all of the stuff that we need in the future, we need to plan for financially in the current moment. And so the other elements of the budget that I'm really grateful for are the fact that we are able to go through it in our finance meetings, and we're very thorough and very transparent and accountable. And I think those are really the values that we uphold as a council. So thank you, and I will support this.
Thank you, Councillor, and I share your sentiments as well. Historically, and I think a lot of communities see this, it's always reserves that are the easiest thing to cut, because you don't necessarily see an immediate impact. But there is an impact, and in that long-term impact, it can be quite significant, both to tax rates as well as to operations and the projects you can move forward to. So it's very important that we use any surplus and use it well to make sure that we are saving for those future needs. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd be happy to support these motions. I too am proud of our reserves, and remember when we brought these reserves policy in over 10 years ago, and it's really brought us to where we are right now, where we're really cognizant of what those numbers and goals should be. Like I said prior, I remember when the tax stabilization reserve target was $1 million. And so I also want to remind everyone that these reserves not only help us plan for the future, but they've had the ability to save our backsides when disaster has struck, in particular the pandemic, as well as when we wanted to start work on the flood mitigation prior to the other levels of government being ready. So it's a great, healthy savings account. I don't feel it's too much. I don't feel it's too little, although it would be great to work on more of our tangible, I can't even say it, capital assets. But I'm happy with where we are putting these dollars for the short term, and I'm thinking it will equip us best when we get hit with whatever downflow from the tariffs. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Worship, and absolutely happy to support these motions. I did like what Councillor Graham was talking about with regards to bumping up the tax stabilization reserve. But also felt Ms. Gibbons brought some interesting points about, we are trying to hit the sweet spots and we're trying our best with what we got. Looming across the nation, we got infrastructure crisis coming down the pipe for pretty much every municipality. And so it does hearten me that we are able to send money into our general municipal capital reserve. And fingers crossed, we can just keep up the momentum of this and perhaps even down the road, with a bit of fortune, accelerate our amounts that we can put into these reserves. So thank you.
Councillor Hillstead.
Thank you. I'm also happy to support the recommended motions. Both reserves serve their purposes, and basically with the potential tariffs and things, both reserves may be needed because it affects both sides. It's not just, if we threw it all into the tax stabilization, that's more the operating side, but we also have a bunch of capital projects, so which will more likely, in my mind, get hit by tariffs just because of where things need to come from. So I like the split that we have, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mara.
Thank you. I too will support this motion. It is nice to have the cushion, and as we've seen when we've done different projects, you see on the little line item, even when we did the budget, is it came from this reserve or that reserve. So it does give us a bit of relief even through the year. So I definitely appreciate these reserves and will support this.
Thank you. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too will be happy to support it. I always appreciate the thoughtfulness of administration and how they bring us their arguments for why things should go where they should go. And yeah, there's going to be some interesting times the next little while. And shoring up both sides of the balance sheet is important. So I really appreciate that, and thank you once again.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everyone, for your comments. And I will now call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And then with respect to the final item, Ms. Gibbons, do you have, is it a large presentation or fairly quick?
I'm trying to remember how many slides I have. No, I don't even really have a presentation. It was really just about the
Yeah.
opportunity
Okay,
to provide any questions on the project. So really, or to Finance Committee,
Perfect.
if you have a lot of questions, it might
That's
take
what
a while. If it's,
That's what I was going to suggest, unless you had prepared a lot, because it was
I have
there
not.
for us, to read. So in that being the case, then I will just open it up to any questions with respect to item D3. Seeing none, I will move that the Finance Committee accept the 2024 capital project summaries as presented. All those in favor? Oh, did anybody want to speak to it? Sorry. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Great. I will now move that we adjourn. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Yeah, I just had to take a look. Okay, so